I think we've run enough on this.
Well, we're changing the theme as we go. I'd like to talk about time in this connection of novelty. One thing that I've noticed is that, and I'm not very old, but that the years tend to get shorter as I get older, and it's occurred to me that this is because I don't recognize as much novelty. I interpret new experiences in terms of old experiences, so not as many new things happen in the course of any given year, or say.
The return voyage always seems shorter than the going out when you're going on a new trip. Yes.
But,
I suppose if you lived forever, then time would go infinitely fast.
Right. Well, either that, I mean, there's a remedy for this, which is to wake up and pay attention to what's going on, because everything is always new. Nothing is ever the same.
Right. Well, I think I'm doing that, but I still get the effect that you're talking about. The years seem shorter. Each one is shorter than the ones before. And I think that's logarithmic. I mean, there's another explanation. It's because your percentage of age is changing less.
But you don't live life by percentages. You know?
Sure you do. I remember when I was, I don't know, 8 or 9, and I thought, gosh, what a long time before I have 2 numbers in my age.
Right.
And so on. And it was a long time. And now 2 years goes by in 6 months, I'd say.
It'll be a while before you have 3 numbers in your age.
Yes. Speaking of age, I think one of the most fascinating things, and I've not used it much in the book, and yet it's one of the most crying out for recognition by science, is the fact that all our cells age. If you take cells of a 55-year-old person, they only live about another 30 or 40 years, whereas cells from a young person will live 80 years.
It has to do with how many times they divide, doesn't it?
Yes. Now, they're always hearing about that heart that they kept alive for a long time in a jar or something, but I don't know whether it was taken from a young person or a young animal or what, but I think that kind of research would be very interesting. And it's very comforting to me to know that I'm all going together. I mean, not parts of me left over waiting for wishing the other parts were there.
So what you're talking about is a limit to longevity, a built-in limit to longevity.
Right. What did you bring that rope for?
You want it?
Yeah.
I think it was holding together one of our wires. It's a loop.
Well, I was really expecting a single piece of rope, but this will do. This, you're talking about mortality. If we live immortally, let's say I have to have an endless rope to demonstrate that.
You have an endless rope?
Well, I mean an endless rope going to infinity both ways. But in this, you want an identity. You can't have an identity if it just goes on forever. You need to mark some place, so you curl yourself up and manage to make some kind of a knot in yourself. Something like that. Oh, damn it.
But it unties so easily.
Well, there I am. I have an identity now. And then I die and it disappears. But the rope's still there. Me is still there. I've lost my identity. Doesn't look as if it helped you.
No, it does. I'm just wondering whether there are a whole bunch of ropes or whether there's only one rope.
Well, each of us has our rope, one rope. Oh, you're bringing that other idea that we might have been several people at once in a past life.
Well, either that or we're all part of the same organism that's forever tying itself in knots.
Well, I don't think we're part of the same.
Well, it wouldn't be an organism.
Oh.
But it's...
Well, it's certainly not the same knot.
No, it
And
could
how
be
could
separate
you have
knots.
different knots in the same rope?
You could tie several more knots in
They
that
wouldn't
same
be at
rope.
the same time.
If you see the rope as time,
Yes, the rope is time. That's what I'm talking about. It says something in time. There'd have to be a lot of ropes. Remember, that was the first word of God in the Dogon tradition? The first word of God was these ropes or strings coming out from his mouth. That was time. Other traditions have Mother Spider. Why Mother Spider for a primary principle? It seems a very odd thing. But Chitz Waterston solved it by recognizing it as second level. It's that long line that the spider comes down from above on.
mm-hmm.
Any rate, a long line or lines are time.
Right, lines can represent time.
And each of us would have our own timeline.
Is the knot in space? The knot takes 2 dimensions. You can't have a knot in the same dimension as the line.
The knot is representing an identity, something on that line that makes it have an identity, because the line itself has no way of knowing itself.
Mm-hmm.
So to get self-knowledge, we need this ego or identity. And then the problem is, well, how can we exist when that's gone? Well, then I just say we still exist because we're always there to see ourselves. We don't...
And what is karma? Would that be memories of past knots?
Karma is what's happening along this line. And could be memories of past knots, yes.
Maybe the knots leave kinks in the rope.
And rope, you have to unknot those old knots, even the remnants. The knots must have some sort of leftover. Actually, you could say it quite differently, because I'm using the knot to express third level identity, a loop coming around.
Right, that's why I said perhaps the knot is in space, even though the line is in time.
Well, the knot creates space, I have to say.
Okay.
Now, memory doesn't have to be in space. It's like energy clumped together or condensed. And when the energy gets condensed, it gets traumatic. It's not available. It's locked up. And people that have psychological troubles have energy locked in some traumatic experience, perhaps in this life, but it could also be in another life.
Mm-hmm.
And then by seeing what it was, I mean, Joan Grant would found about a third of her patients really had traumatic experiences in a past life. And only the ones that had a traumatic experience, only with them was it important that they get treatment from Joan Grant. The others didn't benefit. But she sometimes would feel it so strongly that she felt it before they even got there. So she could tell them immediately,
Mm-hmm.
well, what about that time you died on the battlefield, dying of thirst or something?
Mm-hmm.
And then they would no longer have their urge to drink. Once they recognized
Just
that they
recognizing
died of thirst, that would solve that.
What about your own past lives? I've never heard you talk about any knowledge or experience of them.
I never had any ideas about what... people told me things that were not convincing.
Nothing's ever rung true. Maybe you don't have any leftover...
The best I got was when working with Joan Grant, and I got back into a possible life as a priest in the Andes, and I'd lost touch with God or something. There was a lot of emphasis on a truncated pyramid. Now, whether that was a truncated pyramid architecturally at the time, I thought of it as symbolizing a life where I was building up, but I couldn't complete the upper
Right.
part. And I think that's what's been on my mind ever since in this life.
Is finishing that pyramid.
Yeah.
I thought perhaps today we would talk more about time. It was a possible subject for those other discussions that we didn't, and we never did cover it. What I find really intriguing is the idea of the third dimension as being time as being the third dimension. People talk about time as the fourth dimension. You talk about time as the third dimension. Could you?
I'm so glad you like that.
Could you explain that for the folks?
Well, it seems to cause raised eyebrows. I mentioned it to Bart the other day, and he had George Hall with him on the squawk box, and Bart says, George's eyebrows going up. You better explain that. I think we have to say, I see what brought this about was I saying that space was two-dimensional. Because you look out there and you see, as it were, a screen.
Right.
Well, then, person says, I know that, but I'm over here, and the screen I see includes you looking at the screen, therefore there has to be this dimension as well as the screen.
What, I don't understand that exactly.
Well, let's say I'm looking at this screen, and I see these letters on this can, whatever. So it's like a flat screen. And I say that's two dimensions. That's all I need. But you're seeing me looking.
Right.
So you're another dimension.
Okay.
And you see this as a screen.
Right.
So there must be three dimensions in this screen.
I'm assuming, I'm trusting that you're really seeing something there. I'm trusting that there exists. From here, I can't read the liver pate. I can only see the ER and the
No,
TE.
it doesn't matter if you can read the liver. That's what I see. But
Right.
you say what you see is also screen-like, flat.
Right.
And we combine those, we get three.
Right.
But I say that has decaffeinated or sterilized one of the dimensions, which is the dimension of depth, which is different from the two sideways dimensions. And this dimension of depth is an involvement on your part, because if you are going to change that, you have to move. You have to take time to get there. See, in other words, I look out, and that comes easily. Mentally, I can go back and forth. That's typical of mind. But to get there, I have to take time. I have to walk.
Mm-hmm.
I have to make an effort. This is a different kind of thing from just switching my eyes, or I can even switch my...
Well, switching your eyes takes time too. I mean, presumably you can recognize the third dimension just by moving slightly and realizing that you can see something that you couldn't see a second ago.
Yes, but I'm talking about the screen that I see without switching my eyes. I can keep my eye focused on a point and still look at a different thing. My attention. It's attention that you're talking about.
Attention is equivalent to depth?
No, the tension shifts. I'm just talking about the ability to shift in tension with no expenditure of energy.
Okay.
While in this dimension, I have to actually exert energy to move. And this is again a difference between the tangible and the intangible, or vice versa.
Okay.
But what I need to establish is that there's not a true isomorphism. That's technical gobbledygook for saying dimensions are essentially different.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the depth dimension is different from the sideways dimension. Now, and you must be careful when you say, well, I can see the depth dimension if I get off to one side, that you're really carrying that depth dimension with you.
Right.
You're not really seeing it. It always stays with you. And that, again, is a critique of science which puts the dimensions independent of the observer. That's a case in point. I mean, I touch the microphone, and it changes the picture in a way.
It certainly changes the sound.